Unitarian authors and how their writing has affected society.
Good morning. Around campfires, our ancestors told stories. Some were imaginative tales of how the world came to be. Some were just little explanations of what that star meant in the sky. Sometimes it was just tales of the hunt. Story is an integral part of being human. Nowadays, when we hear a story, we often want to know whether it's true or false, especially if it's a news story. But other stories contain truths that are deeper than facts. They look for meanings that's behind the facts or connects the facts. Meanings about morals, ethics, identity. And even when the facts of a story are made up, the meanings can still be true. Bookstores use the terms fiction and nonfiction. They do not use the terms true and false. Because a nonfiction conspiracy book might have a conspiracy that is based on actual facts. All good conspiracies have a couple little facts in there to grab you so you say, yeah, that's true. Each fact is a pearl of truth, but the chain that connects all the pearls may be completely false, a fool's gold. On the other hand, in fiction, the facts may be fake pearls, talking rabbits, single characters that are made up of a composite of 3 real-life people, magic powers, monsters. But the chain that connects these fake facts may be a pure golden truth. Stories help us visit places that we might never go. A fictional setting might tell us something about the human condition. Today I'm going to talk about some Unitarian and Universalist storytellers and what they did. Dickens described the poverty of London, the underbelly of the industrial age. Louisa May Alcott idealized her family to outline possible roles for the women in the late 19th century. Beatrix Potter used talking rabbits and squirrels and ducks to enforce and instill the family values of the day. Rod Serling used the bizarre to make us look at our hidden assumptions. And Barbara Kingsolver uses fictional characters to explore human relationships and our relationship to the earth. I begin with Dickens, a 19th century English Unitarian. His novels include Oliver Twist and A Christmas Carol. There's actually a word, Dickensian, which is based on his name. It's any situation that is so awful, with awful criminals and terrible poverty, that just causes such feelings of degradation. But Dickens portrayed the poor with empathy for their struggles. He grew up poor, and his novels actually started as newspaper serials, something that people could buy for a small amount of money and read a chapter a day. Thus, he was accessible to the masses and beloved by the masses. A Christmas Carol helped revive the celebration of Christian with family feasting. The Reformation and the puritanical sense of England discouraged the celebration of Christmas because the parties and festivities appeared too much like paganism. So in this book, Scrooge's opinion of Christmas in the 1840s when this was written was actually the majority opinion of the landed gentry of England. But by portraying them as Scrooge and the Cratchit family as the heroes, Scrooge became converted and shouted Merry Christmas, and soon the whole English-speaking world followed. Oliver Twist encouraged that concern for the poor. We still hear the plaintive cry of poverty. Please, sir, may I have some more? Louisa May Alcott was an American Unitarian. Her father was Bronson Alcott, who founded Transcendentalism along Emerson, Thoreau, and Margaret Fuller. She wrote in the latter part of the 19th century, and she talked about the struggle and opportunities for young women. But she also wrote about the seriousness of death. In a period of time when the nation was still grieving for the 600,000 that died in the Civil War. About the same amount of people that have died from COVID. But you have to remember back then, the country was much, much smaller. So everyone knew someone who had died. She writes of the death of a little girl. Simple, sincere people seldom speak much of their piety. It shows itself in acts rather than in words, and has more influence in homilies and protestations. Beth could not reason upon or explain the faith that gave her courage and patience to give up life and cheerfully wait for death. She could not say, I'm glad to go, for life was very sweet to her. She could only sob out, I will try to be willing, while she held fast to Joe as the first bitter wave of this great sorrow broke over them together. And throughout the course of the story, this grief is part of the motivation for Jo to live her life. Alcott writes, love is the only thing that we can carry with us. Is the only thing we can carry with us when we go. And it makes the end so easy. The final chapter of the book is called Forgetting, but we never truly forget those who who die. They kind of live with us. They go back to nature, and nature feeds us. Alcott writes, "The invigorating air did them both good, and much exercise worked wholesome changes in their minds as well as bodies. They seemed to get clearer views of life and duty up there amongst the everlasting hills. The fresh winds blew away desponding doubts, delusive fancies, and moody mists. The warm spring sunshine brought out all sorts of aspiring ideas, tender hopes, and happy thoughts. The lake seemed to wash away troubles of the past, and the grand mountains to look benignly down upon them, saying, 'Little children, love one another.'" Beatrix Potter was also an English Unitarian like Dickens, and she wrote at the turn of the 20th century, in the early 1900s. She focused upon the youngest children. Fairy tales of the day did not spare children from harsh reality. Beth alluded to that earlier in this service. Now, the tale of Peter Rabbit starts cheerfully enough. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, and Peter. But soon the mother gives a warning. "Don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. Mrs. McGregor put him in a pie." Of course, Peter disobeys and wanders into McGregor's garden and eats until he is sick to his stomach. Then Mr. McGregor chases him and he barely escapes. Upon returning home, he is exhausted and confined to bed, while his obedient siblings enjoy dinner with their mother. A similar tale is told of Squirrel Nutkin. Each day, a group of squirrels would paddle their rafts to Owl Island. Now, owls are predators, but their nuts on the island were very good. And so they worked out a deal with Old Owl. They would begin by offering a sacrifice. Mice, moles, eggs, or honey. Anything to distract the owl long enough so they could scurry about the island and collect food. But Squirrel Nutkin was always lazy and disrespectful. While the squirrels were offering this sacrifice to the owl, Squirrel Nutkin would sing and tell riddles, and one time he even jumped on top of Mr. Owl's head. And Mr. Owl captured him. He escaped, Squirrel Nutkin, only because the owl was holding on to his tail and it broke off. After losing his tail, Squirrel Nutkin took life very seriously. Beatrix Potter could have been one of the great scientists. She was a botanist, and she drew incredibly detailed pictures of fungi and mushrooms, and she even prepared a paper explaining how they actually reproduced. But she was not allowed to present it because she was a woman, and a woman just didn't go about doing those scientific studies where she lived. So she turned her considerable artistic talent to children's stories. And if you read any of her books, the pictures seem to tell more than the words. And even though she's putting buttons and coats and shoes and ribbons on these animals, the animals themselves are drawn with remarkable accuracy. And she earned a lot of money with these books. And she then used her earnings to buy and preserve the small farms of the English Lake District in a way to conserve the unique plants and animals that populated the area, rather than having the area turn into the monoculture farming that has been so common in the latter 20th century. So her knowledge of animals and love for animals started a conservation movement in England and the world, which lasts to this day. Imagine, if you will, Yellow Springs, Ohio. A non-practicing Jewish veteran is attending Antioch College on the GI Bill. He meets an agnostic Protestant woman and falls in love. They embraced Unitarianism, the faith of Horace Mann, the founder of the college. They married in the college chapel. He graduated and started a career in writing, wrestling with the ethical twists and turns. He stepped into the twilight zone. Such was the life of Rod Serling. In the Dictionary of UU Biography, Berenga Zen writes, Serling believed that of all the media, TV lends itself most beautifully to presenting a controversy. Corporate sponsors, on the other hand, had no desire to have their products matched with messages that they deemed offensive. In 1959, Serling expressed this frustration. I think it's criminal that we are not permitted to make dramatic note of the social evils that exist of controversial themes because they are inherent in our society. Because of the hostile creative environment, Serling began to see the advantages of writing science fiction and fantasy. He disguised his work. He learned that advertisers would routinely approve stories with controversial situations if they took place in fictional worlds. Out of this realization came the television series The Twilight Zone from 1959 to 1964, on which Serling and other writers would enjoy unprecedented artistic freedom. From within this surreal world of the Twilight Zone, Serling addressed dozens of social issues, such as prejudice in The Eye of the Beholder, loss of identity in the story Mirror Image, capital punishment in Execution, censorship in The Obsolete Man, the Holocaust, Death Heads Revisited, and ageism, the trade-ins. Serling's social activism also took the form of writing letters to newspaper editors. In one poignant example, Serling responded to Dr. Max Rafferty, a religious conservative educator who had a weekly column in the Los Angeles Times. On October 10, 1966, Rafferty's column addressed social reform and claimed that humanity's problems were not the responsibility of society, but of the individual. The article's theme is well expressed in Rafferty's statement, "I don't feel guilty about crime in our cities because I'm not committing any." Searle's incensed response was published 5 days later. In it, he rebuked Dr. Rafferty with these words, "The good doctor had best take his Bible in hand and discover what is the compassion of faith, the selflessness of worship, and the charity of Christ," and concluded by saying, "You should take note of what the ghost of Jacob Marley said to Ebenezer Scrooge in A Christmas Carol. 'Mankind,' cries the ghost, 'was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business.'" Like many UUs who have studied world religions, Searle could quote the Bible and understood what it was in its contents better than many Christians. But he chose to conclude his argument with the words of another Unitarian, Charles Dickens. His philosophy is captured in the first introduction to his series. There is a fifth dimension beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination, in an area we call the Twilight Zone. Storytelling, listening, incites our imaginations to consider different possibilities. A more recent storyteller who uses fiction in her search for truth is Barbara Kingsolver. Gail and I once preached at her church in the western corner of Virginia near the North Carolina border. We did not meet her, but we met her daughter, who was doing childcare that day. And Kingsolver has written nonfiction about her life in Virginia. In 2007, she released Animal Vegetable Miracle, and she wrote, "This is the story of a year in which we made every attempt to feed ourselves animals and vegetables whose provenance we really knew, and how our family was changed by our first year of deliberately eating food produced from the same place where we worked, went to school, loved our neighbors, drank the water, and breathed the air." And I think this being a nonfiction was probably her perspective of the family. And I bet you we could find some perspectives with any family, like any family, that says maybe that's not true. But it was a story. She was the best storyteller in the family, so she won the day. As a mother, she was putting her family through an adventure, and she documented it. But a similar thing had happened to her when she was a child. Her father was a physician who often went overseas to help developing nations. In 1963, when she was 8, he went to the Congo. It had just overthrown the Belgian, and there was much unrest as they struggled with self-rule. But she knew none of that. She was young. She did not know the language, but she still had fun playing with the local children. And she gained perspective about cultural difference. When the family returned to Kentucky, she realized that she had knowledge that the other white kids did not understand. Her trips abroad made her feel like an outsider when she returned home. This fact of life germinated in her, and from it came her most famous novel, The Poisonwood Bible, written 25 years after this fact. And she changed the details of the facts to put more philosophical struggles into the book. Ideas that she didn't understand when she was 8. And she set it in 1959 so it would include life before and after the revolution. And instead of being a volunteer doctor, the father is portrayed as a Christian minister, a missionary who could not understand why the natives did not want to be baptized in the river, which was infested with alligators. This fictional account allowed her to explore patriarchy and the exploitation of natural resources. And instead of one daughter, there were 4. The one who was vain and hated losing all the modern conveniences of the United States. The one who was devoted to her dad's work. The one who fell in love with the culture of the Congo. And the one who died. When we reflect upon our own lives, we can view it from several perspectives. And we often have contradictions within ourselves. And the story can change each time we tell it, depending on our audience. And we are changed by the telling of the story. When asked whether her stories are autobiographical, Kingsolver replies, "Not at all. The plots are not my life. Those characters are not people I know, and none of them is me. My job, as I understand it, is to invent lives that are far more enlightening than my own." Once a reader, a psychologist, wrote, "Come on now, how can you claim you're not writing about yourself? Taylor Greene and the bean trees moved from Kentucky to Arizona, like you did. Cody Noline in Animal Dreams taught biology. You studied biology. Why do you persist in the infantile need to deny you are writing about yourself?" To this, Kingsolver responds, "Yikes! Did I move from Kentucky to Arizona like Taylor Greene? Yes, but via France. Did someone leave an abandoned child in my car along the way? No. Does my fiction reflect my worldview? Probably, but I have not done a fraction of the things my characters do, such as running from the law, adopting an abused child, being an expert cockfighter, having Alzheimer's, being a gay man, being a straight man, being the child of a Christian missionary, cooking for Diego Rivera, having great sex in a Nazi ruin. Do I seem that energetic?" There are many more UU storytellers I could talk about. Kurt Vonnegut, Ray Bradbury, George Eliot, John Updike, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Herman Melville, Robert Fulghum. And there are actors who tell stories that others have written. Paul Newman, Joanne Woodward, Cher, Christopher Reeve, Diane Carroll. But the UU storyteller I want you to consider today is yourself. What stories have you lived? What stories do you choose to tell? And to whom do you choose to tell them? What fictional stories are true to your spirit? What myths give your life meaning? How are you informed by the world around you? Someone once told me that God is light and humanity like a mirror ball. Or for those of you of a certain age, a disco ball. Spinning on the ceiling. As our lives spin beyond our control, occasionally we catch a piece of light and reflect it to the universe. Our stories are never complete, and any flaw in our mirror distorts the light. But those flaws result in new forms of light and new understanding. And when the light is not shining on us and our own lives are dark, we can be fed by the stories that surround us. Reflecting upon the stories of your life and others, meaning and purpose is always swirling around us. May we bless and be blessed.